It is why you keep losing at chess. You listen to so much information here and there, and then you start playing a game, and it's a total mess in your head. You don't know how to apply the knowledge you have got, which principles to use at this particular moment of the game. Well, let's sort it to the right places so that you know how exactly you can use the knowledge you have already got in your games to actually get better results. What's up, chess player, and welcome to the Journey to Grandmaster, the place where you can improve every single aspect of your chess game. I'm finally back home after Munich tournament, very strong one. I enjoy playing it a lot, and here is the recap of round number 8. It was such a strategical battle between my opponent and me. We both wanted to win the game because the draw wouldn't really give us anything, and there was so many really instructive points that I want to share with you. My opponent started with the move e4, and this was already a surprise for me, because he played c4 for the entire tournament, and yes, I knew he's playing e4 occasionally, but that wasn't my main focus of preparation. I played c5. Well, I wanted to shake the position from the very beginning, and the Sicilian defense is the best opponent to do just that. My opponent played knight to f3, I played e6, and here the main line for white is to play d4 and fight for the center. This is what you always should focus on in your games. Center is the most important part of the board. This small center, the 4 squares, and this big center of 16 squares, where you should bring all of your pieces and pawns and just make sure you fight for it, because otherwise your opponent is going to get the control of it, and then it's going to be simpler using the center to keep pressure on you and, well, create some threats. But instead of playing d4, my opponent actually played the move d3. This is Bobby Fischer's idea, just to develop your pieces fast here on the king side, play g3, bishop g2, castle, and then launch your attack there. This is exactly what happened in the game, at least in the beginning. I played the move knight to c6. My opponent played g3, and I decided to do the same. Also, fianchetto my bishop over here, where it's going to control the entire diagonal. And this is exactly what happened, bishop g2 and bishop to g7. So you see the bishop is very, very powerful. I also control the d4 square a lot, so now it's much more difficult for white to make the move d4 and, well, fight for the center once again. But if he already played d3, it's kind of a clear indication this is not on his agenda, at least for the time being. Now he just castled, very reasonable. I played knight to e7, and he played rook to e1. Well, I do have a lot of options, but I was worried about this move e5, because, well, it somehow controls a lot of squares. So for example, if I just castle, my opponent can play e5 here, and I felt like it's not that convenient for me to deal with it, because imagine I give 2 more tempi for white. He plays knight to d2, knight to c4, and then he's ready to place it on d6, and then that would be really, really horrible for me, and I don't really have a good way to stop it. Yes, I can play the move queen to c7, attacking the e5 pawn once again, but he can just defend it once again. The move bishop to f4. I mean, I do have some options to attack it with knight d5, maybe not bishop to f4, but just queen e2. And then I don't really have another attacker, and it's tough for me because this plan knight e2, knight c4 is coming. Yes, I want to get rid of this pawn on e5, so maybe I can play d6 and something like that, but then he takes bishop f4 with a tempo. I mean, I wasn't happy about it anyway. So I decided I can just play d6 in the very beginning, just to stop this whole idea altogether, and then there is no problem. So he played here c3. Well, that's very reasonable. He's stopping my bishop and making sure he doesn't have any problems along this diagonal. And also he prepares the move d4. Well, maybe it's gonna come. And here I castled, because I was kind of ready for the move d4. My idea was to take, and then suddenly play queen to b6, developing yet another piece. So this is like the first principle that I really want you to remember in terms of openings and in terms of development. The golden principle of development. One piece, one move. This way, you're going to develop all of your pieces as fast as possible and as active as possible. Please always focus on it, because it sounds so simple, but I notice it every single time when I analyze my students' games that they just can't bring all of their pieces into the game, and they suffer so much from it. So please don't repeat their mistakes. The golden rule I would suggest you always keep in your mind when you play chess: whenever you have an opportunity to make a developing move and you don't make it, you should have a very, very good reason to do that. Otherwise, always develop your pieces. Imagine how cool it would be to play chess without ever having opening troubles again. What if I told you I could teach you all openings you will ever need in just 10 days? You get lifetime access to more than 110 pure value video tutorials, almost 100 practical tasks to apply your knowledge immediately into practice, 30 plus bonus videos to dive 10 times deeper, as well as private community where all questions you might ever have are answered daily. Get the $200 limited time discount with the link in the description, and forget about all opening pain once and for all. Okay, so I'm bringing a new piece, queen to b6. I'm attacking here this central pawn d4. You cannot allow to lose it, of course. This is a central, very, very important one. So you can only protect it with the bishop to e3, but then I have queen takes b2. This is not great news. And if you play d5, kind of, well, solving the problem like that, there is no target on d4 to attack anymore, then you're opening up the entire diagonal. And I was thinking about playing bishop takes b2. Yes, I'm sacrificing my knight on c6, but I threaten just to win your rook on a1, and that feels, well, very dangerous. So that was my justification why I wasn't afraid of the move d4 from the white side. Apparently, my opponent has figured that out and played the move a3. This is kind of a tricky move, because first of all, it strengthens the idea of the move d4, because now this rook, remember, my idea was to trap that rook in the end of the variation and just win it. But now it's gonna have this a2 square. I'm not gonna be able to win it anymore. And besides, my opponent just wants to play b4 in some variations. For example, the move I considered here for black was the move e5. And by the way, the engine confirms e5 is the right way to play. But I was somehow worried about this move b4. I thought it's inconvenient for me. White has a very simple plan here. But the engine says, well, why are you so afraid of it? Just play a6, stop this annoying b5 idea, and you're good to go. You can play h6 later on, covering this g5 square, play bishop to e6, finishing your development, controlling so many squares there, and b4 is actually not a big deal. This is exactly what I should have done. So often the mistake that we are doing, both the beginner, the intermediate players, and also the advanced players, we are overthinking things. So we are trying to create something complicated out of it when it's absolutely not necessary. So back to the starting position here. I could have just made a normal move e5, and of course I have seen it. It stops the e5, the d4 move, because now if you play d4, I just take it there, you take it back, and I play something like bishop g4, and that is incredibly annoying because d4 is so much hanging you cannot save it. If you play d5, then you're opening up the bishop, and this knight is coming to d4. I mean, this is a fantastic position for black. And if you take on c5, well, actually, quite a similar situation, maybe not that bad because you can exchange the queens and avoid the pin, but anyway, this is just a very nice outcome of the opening for black. And b4, like I said, is not a big deal, so this is a very simple thing to do. Instead, I was thinking for such a long time, I'm not sure why I thought somehow b4 is unpleasant for me in that variation, so I decided to allow g4 instead and played the move b5 to get some counterplay on the queen side. But this is completely unnecessary. Like, you should not do that. Just play those simple chess, use the principles we are talking about here, try to focus on it. But what is very beneficial at this point is the method of 3 questions that I have learned from Jacob Agard. This is like life-changing one. I have made a video about it. Somewhere here you're gonna see, I mean, definitely take a look once you're done with this video. The method consists of 3 questions. What are the weaknesses in the entire position, both for you and your opponent? What is your opponent's idea? And what is the worst placed piece? And you could use this method the entire game. It helps you like guide your focus into the right direction so that you're not really focused on their own stuff, but actually on the stuff that matters. And here, my opponent's idea is clearly to play d4 and control the center. He didn't do it immediately because, well, the problems I have mentioned before with queen b6, so he's preparing that. All I need to do is to stop that idea, and e5 is also a useful move for me because I control more squares, I'm opening up my bishop, and eventually I'm getting ready for the move f5, very reasonable plan here for black. Instead, well, I made it too complicated, I played b5, and let's see why it's not so great. My opponent plays d4 and gets the full control of the center. My idea, that's exactly what I played, was to take here and then play d5, because I cannot allow him to play d5. Then I'm really stuck, I'm very passive here. This is a huge difference comparing to the variations we have seen earlier. So I played d5 myself, but now he plays e5. Now my bishop on g7 is completely stuck there. But my idea was to put pressure on this d4 pawn, so I played queen to b6, and this is, by the way, why I played b5 in the first place, to get more space on the queen side. And now my queen is secure, there is no way to put pressure on it. And then I want to play knight f5, attack the d4 pawn once again. I want to play f6 to open my bishop again so that the bishop puts pressure on d4 as well. So I thought, well, I have a very clear plan, let me just execute it. But somehow it's just not enough. And my opponent now made the same mistake I was talking about earlier, the mistake I want you to avoid in your games. He played the move g4. So he asked himself, okay, what is my opponent's idea? That's already the right question to ask. Then you have a choice like how to deal with it. There is one way to play g4, because my idea is knight f5, as I mentioned, putting pressure on this d4 pawn, and it's not that comfortable for you to handle. So g4 is one way to stop it. But remember what I have told you about the golden principle in the opening. You want to focus on your development, and you don't want to make more than one move with the same piece. Or a pawn, that also applies to a pawn. This one has already moved to g3, and now you're making yet another move to play g4, and that costs time. And time is the most precious resource both in life and in chess, because now you're giving black a free tempo to continue their attack, and that's exactly what I did. I played the move f6. But what is another way to deal with the problem? Well, remember that development is the key to success in the opening and in chess in general. So you have a bunch of pieces that are not developed yet, and you can just do that. You can play knight to c3, then I can execute my idea and play knight f5, but you can just relocate the knight, play knight to e2, now the pawn on d4 is protected, and you're ready just to kick the knight away with a tempo. Then you're gonna have the same situation as if you played g4 in the first place, but I'm gonna waste 2 tempi for absolutely nothing, because I have played knight f5 already, then after g4 I have to play knight to e7 back. Nothing has changed in my position, but I have wasted 2 tempi. And your knight is already not on b1, but on e2, where it's having much more promising position. It can go to f4, for example. The knight is just beautiful there. So this is once again overcomplicating things. And what I notice so much both in my students' games, in my viewers' games, you try to protect against the threats that are actually not that dangerous. Either they don't exist at all, or they're just not dangerous for you, and you can at the same time make something useful. So when you choose a way how to deal with this threat, always try to combine it with something useful for your position. Anyway, after g4, I played f6. I want to continue putting some pressure here on the center, because otherwise I'm just very, very passive. And you never want to be passive in chess. This is like the path to oblivion. So instead of that, you should get some active ideas. You should try to create threats for your opponent. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm attacking the pawn on d4 once again. My opponent plays here bishop e3, very reasonable decision, just to continue the development and deal with the threat at the same time. And here once again, I overcomplicated things. This time it was me who made another move, like wasted time to deal with this threat, which doesn't really exist. So I wanted to play bishop d7 and bring my pieces, like continue the development, finish it, and then get ready for e5, maybe relocate my knight to d6 and all of that. And the bishop d7 is a starting move for all of that. But my problem was this move knight to e5. And I would be happy just to take it with the knight, then with the bishop and win a pawn. But the problem is, if I do that, then my opponent takes it with the pawn, my queen is under attack, my bishop is under attack, so I just lose the game on the spot. I cannot do that. And otherwise, this knight on e5 is very annoying for me. Like, I need to do something about this bishop. It's hanging now, it's going to be a fork, so I'm gonna lose so much material. But it turns out this bishop is a bad one anyway. I can just play queen to c7. That's gonna protect the bishop. If you want to take it, you're welcome. Otherwise, I'm attacking this knight. Probably I was afraid of something like f4. And now this knight is so stable on e5, and I thought, well, this is not great news. But actually, the engine argues I can just take it on e5, he takes back, and then I can play bishop h4, I have the f file, I have literally not that many problems, because now this e6 pawn is not that weak, there is no way to attack it, and I have my prospects, I have my counterplay. This is what matters. Big thank you to the sponsor of this video, the Chestnut company, which is providing this beautiful Chestnut Evo board for me for the purposes of this analysis. It's extremely useful because you can just analyze all of your games, all of the positions, and save it in the PGN formats to take a look later, which you can never do with a simple board. It has so many interesting and useful functions. I have made a complete review about it, and if you want to take advantage of the special offer and get a huge discount and buy one of the Chestnut products, this is just one of them. They have different ones to offer you depending on your preferences, so if you're interested, just use the link in the description to take advantage of this amazing offer and get a huge discount. So that was a simple and reasonable plan. But because I was scared of this threat, which is actually not a threat, I decided to play bishop g7 just to make sure that my bishop is not hanging in that variation. And that is wasting another so important tempo. So please don't repeat those mistakes in your games. My opponent played knight c3, and now I finally went for my plan with bishop to d7. My opponent plays knight to e2, relocating his knight, but I felt like he's wasting quite a lot of time. Once again, if I were in white's shoes here, I would rather prefer to finish the development. It's almost always, like 99% of the cases, it's better to bring a new piece to the game instead of making a lot of moves with the same piece, back to the golden principle. So this is a very key idea. It's very simple to understand, but if you're going to do it in every single one of your games, I guarantee you're going to get so much better results. Anyway, knight goes to e2. I play rook to d8 because I have calculated many lines, and my problem was the bishop was hanging after knight to e5. So I decided to play not rook to e8 but rook to d8 so that it is protected. Now my opponent decides to continue the development. He brings the queen to the game, and now I suddenly realized that maybe his idea is not to fight positionally here for some squares, like relocate his knight, which was my idea of his plan, knight c1, knight d3, then knight e5, knight c5, but actually he wants just to deliver a checkmate here, create some checkmating ideas like bishop h6, exchange the bishops, bring the queen, all of the knights, and so on. But I decided, okay, I just need to continue my plan. That was relocating the knight to d6. d6 is a beautiful square for my knight, so I should just go for it. But I actually had a better move here. Very straightforward one. Once you see this queen on d2, the first thing you're thinking about, well, let me know in the comments what is your thought, but I immediately thought about going knight to a5 because it's creating this threat of knight b3, fork in one move. What can be simpler than that? And then if you need to waste yet another tempo to deal with it, the knight is also coming to c4 with a tempo attacking the queen and the bishop. But I didn't play it because I was worried about bishop to h6. And now if I play knight to b3, of course, this is like the most straightforward move you should calculate. Then I was worried about queen g5, and suddenly the knight on e7 is hanging. And if I decide to exchange the bishops here, then the queen takes, and then this knight is coming to g5, and that would be a checkmating threat in one, which is very, very difficult to deal with. But it turned out I haven't calculated the variations till the end. I haven't found the right solution here. Instead of taking on h6, I can just play bishop to f6. I can just attack the queen. It has to spend yet another tempo, and then I can just take on a1, exchange, he's gonna take on f8, and I'm gonna get a great position because I'm still putting pressure on the d4 pawn, the attack is gone, I'm gonna have a pair of bishops, so that would be a completely different story. So I once again underestimated this knight a5 idea. Maybe I believed my opponent here because I thought, well, if you play queen to d2, it's so obvious that knight a5 comes with those threats, and so he must have prepared something. But turns out that was just a bluff. So when you look for moves in your games, always start with the most active opportunities, which are, of course, checks, captures, threats, and active moves. And knight to c8 is a move back. Yes, it's remaneuvering the knight. I thought the knight is my worst piece here. The knight on e7 and has absolutely no prospects. But knight a5 is just more active, and I absolutely must start with it. I did, I just couldn't find the tactical justification behind it in the end of the day. Please do that in your games. So anyway, knight c8. Also, I thought that's not such a big deal because, well, the knight on d6 is going to be great. It's just that first it's lower than knight to a5, and secondly, it doesn't create that additional threat of knight to b3 with a fork. My opponent played here bishop to h6, continuing his plan, and I decided just to ignore it. Okay, he's making a lot of moves with the same pieces, so I have time, well, to do the same basically because I have already developed my knight, but it was poor on e7, and now it's much better having those e4 and c4 squares at his disposal. But notice that I'm only starting to do that, like making a second and third move with the same piece that has already been developed once I have developed all of my pieces. Not before that. I have developed every single one of them, maybe not ideal squares, but at least all of them are developed. And then I start thinking about improving some of those pieces. Of course, starting with the worst placed pieces. Not in the other order. It's very, very important to invite everybody to the party first. Anyway, my opponent decided to exchange the bishops here. Bishop takes, king takes, and he played the move knight to g3. So he's ready for the attack, it seems. He wants to play knight to h5, check, queen g5, knight h4, knight g5, somehow combine all of those ideas and create problems for me. So I decided, okay, let me prepare for that, and I played rook d to e8. But once again, it turned out it was a bluff. I could have really played the move knight to c4 and attack that queen and not be afraid. Although the engine gives it a completely equal evaluation based on the fact that some perpetual checks are coming. And I, of course, wanted to win the game, as you remember from the beginning of the video. So I didn't really want to allow that. So after knight h5, there would be some crazy, crazy lines. So let's not get into it. Just let's say that I wanted to make sure everything is safe, and that move knight c4 is still on my agenda. So the point of the move rook to e8, first I improve my rook, because the rook on d8 is not really doing much now, and here maybe it supports the move e5 in the right moment, or just protecting the pawn on e6. For example, after knight g5, that would be hanging twice, but it also frees the d8 square for my queen, so that when the queen comes to g5, I have the move queen to d8. And that's, by the way, exactly what happened. My opponent brought the last piece into the game. So you see that in the end of the day, we both developed every single one of our pieces, and that's very good. Now, white should be a little bit better here because his pieces are more active, and I have this strategical weakness on e6. Like, he also has a strategical weakness, this isolated pawn on d4, but as long as it's well protected, it's not such a big deal. Okay, so I played knight c4, I decided it's time for that. He played queen g5, and I played queen to d8. Now I was just hoping desperately that no sacrifices are working here. After knight to h5 check, I can just go somewhere back, let's say king to h8, and the queen and the knight are hanging. If you play queen to h6, trying to deliver a checkmate in one, I can just take your knight, knight g5, and here something like rook e7, just controlling all of the squares. The queen protects the rook, this rook protects the h7 pawn, everything is safe, and black is completely winning. But now my opponent suddenly plays queen c1. It was a complete surprise for me because I thought, well, if he's already coming to g5, then probably he wants to attack, but now the queen goes back. And here is a very instructive moment, like what to do as black. I played here queen to f6, which seemed to be logical. Like, I want to improve my queen, it's not ideal on d8, and of course I don't want to repeat the position and go back to b6. On f6, it also puts pressure on the d4 pawn. It controls the f file. The knight can't go away, for example, because f2 is hanging, and anticipating queen to f4 because I would be happy to exchange the queens. Then my pieces are active. I attack a lot of my opponent's pawns. But it turns out this is actually quite a mistake. And the best move, the idea is right, we need to improve the queen, but you're not going to believe the right square for the queen is e7. It didn't even cross my mind, because how can you put your queen against the rook? This is another important principle in chess that we learn. Your queen is not great on the same file with your opponent's rook. Why? Because it can just get attacked, right? You can feel pressure here. For example, bishop d5 is somewhere in the air, like this knight has to jump away, then bishop g5 is a problem. Like, as a human being, you don't even consider this move, but it actually is the best move. Why? Because it stops white's idea. Well, kind of stops. Which is b3, just getting rid of this knight. But this time we are attacking the a3 pawn twice, and we can just grab the pawn, even though the position is around equal. I mean, this is the moment where we probably overtake the initiative. Now white has to prove that he has compensation for this pawn. And after queen f6, I don't have such a resource. My opponent just played b3, and now I have to go back. So this is the difference. And also, it turns out the queen is actually not that great on f6. It has some difficulties to fight against. My opponent played queen to b2. Well, just improving the queen, protecting the pawn here, and stay with me because the most interesting part of the game is coming here. I mean, in a few moves, something crazy is gonna happen. I played queen to f4. I'm attacking this pawn on g4, and seems like the queen is getting more active. But actually, he just plays h3, and now it feels like the queen might be not that well placed. I played king g8. I don't like my king being on the same diagonal with this queen, so I go away. He plays rook e3, and that prepares a very, very nasty idea, which somehow underestimated. I mean, I knew this move is coming, yet I haven't prepared for it. So the right way, and I knew that I was going to play this move, would be to play knight to f7, and of course white's idea is to play knight to e5. Now I'm much more prepared for it. I can just take it with this knight, or maybe take with the c knight, and then come to g5 with my second knight, putting some pressure over there, and that feels all right. But somehow I forgot that I need to do it. I thought, well, why do I need to go back? My knight on d6 might be actually a good piece. So instead of that, I played the move a5 here. And yes, it's quite a useful move. I want to play a4, attack this b3 pawn, then place my knight on c4. But I just don't have time for that. And time, you remember, the most important thing in chess. My opponent plays knight to e5 immediately, attacking my bishop on d7, attacking the knight on c6, and I just cannot ignore it. I have to take it. But that means I'm wasting such an important time. And my opponent takes, once again with the tempo. I don't have time to go to c4, the square is still covered. I have to go to f7 now, but it's now a free move for my opponent, and he continues creating threats. Now he played the move rook to d4. It wasn't the best move. He could have played knight to e2 immediately, preparing the move f4 anyway, because this rook on d4 actually gets attacked later on in the game. Let's see what happened. I played queen to h6. He played f4, and at this point I felt like, yeah, my opponent is going forward, I'm going back, this cannot be good. The engine actually says, well, it's not that bad at all, and I did the right thing here. I played knight to d8, relocating my knight to c6, attacking that rook, and at the same time I am attacking that pawn on f4. He played knight to e2, I played knight to c6, attacking the rook went back, and here is the moment I was thinking about this positional sacrifice. I'm taking on f4, and I'm giving up my rook for a knight and a pawn. Now, let me know in the comments whether you would do it and change the nature of the position like that, because you get quite some compensation. You're attacking the rook in the end of the day with the queen, the pawn on e5, the second rook is ready to come into the game, whether you would do it. I decided, no, I don't want to do it because I don't see a sufficient compensation afterwards, and I still don't feel like I must do it, like I don't have any other options, because my position is pretty much solid here. So I decided I need to continue doing something here on the queen side, because if I don't do anything, eventually those pawns are going to be weaknesses. So I just have to decide whether I want to play b4 or a4. I wasn't sure about that. I was thinking for a lot of time and decided to play a4. And the engine says actually b4 was the right move and a4 not the right one. It wasn't that clear for me during the game, because if you take, you're making this c4 square available for my knight, so I have some knight a5, knight c4 ideas. My opponent played b4 instead to stop that. But here I once again have c4 squares. Yeah, I cannot use my knights to get there, but I have my rook. And so this is exactly what I decided to play. First of all, knight to e7, because you have to be careful. I was calculating here the move rook to c8 immediately, but it seems like there are some ideas like rook takes d5 immediately, sacrificing the entire rook, and then this bishop comes to d5 with a check. And if I step away to the diagonal, then e6 comes with a check from the queen, and the bishop is under attack on d7, it's going to be lost, then the knight is under attack. This feels like a total disaster for me. So I wanted to be careful with such variations. Once again, thinking about your opponent's ideas. This is like essential. So I started with the move knight e7. Now my knight is defending the pawn on d5. It's also helping me to stop the f5 ideas potentially, and I'm ready with my rook to remaneuver to the c file. So that's what I did. Rook to f1, and I played rook to c8. He played rook g3, and we were approaching the time trouble at this point. You remember, at move 40, you get additional 30 minutes to add to your time, and then, of course, you are good to go. But right now, it was move number 36, so it is the most stressful part of the game. Of course, in case you're in time trouble, which happens quite a lot of times in the tournament games, he played rook g3. I'm going to c4 now. And it was kind of provocation, because it was clear for me my opponent is doing everything to prepare for this move f5. And he did it. It's an attempt for a brilliant move here, f5. Let me know in the comments. Actually, pause the video for a second here and try to find the solution. How to deal with this move. What to do as black. You obviously cannot take with the g pawn, because then after g takes f, you are having a check, this pawn is coming to f6. This is a very, very bad turn of events. But I can take with the e pawn, and seemingly everything is great because d5 is still protected. If you take on f5, I take with the bishop. But my opponent had a very, very concrete idea in mind what to do. He plays e6, sacrificing yet another pawn here, and it turns out if you take it, you're completely busted. Queen comes to e5, attacking the bishop, attacking the knight, and even objectively it's better for white, but in terms of practical position, it's very difficult to like even do anything. Something like rook to c6, for example, doesn't help you at all, because I'm gonna take it here. Yes, you can try to take, but it doesn't help. I'm gonna just take on d5 now, attacking your bishop, attacking your rook. The entire position just collapses and white is winning. But thank God I have found the right move here, even though I was kind of in a time trouble as well. Had 10 minutes at this point. I played the move bishop to c6. And this move is protecting the pawn on d5, and I'm ready to meet f5. My opponent played f5 anyway. Well, he needs to continue playing something active, because otherwise, if I manage to stabilize the position, I'm gonna be just winning. So yes, he's using the fact that the g-pawn is still pinned, and now I have to decide whether rook should take or knight should take, and it's move number 40, the most important move. And at this point, so many players are making their final mistakes, very important ones. So please, once again, feel free to pause the video and find the right capture, because obviously we have to get rid of this pawn. The question is whether we take with the rook or with the knight. So the principles tell us that if our opponent is attacking and we have the material advantage, we have to exchange as many pieces as possible, because that allows us to reduce our opponent's attacking potential and making it simpler for us to defend. Following this logic, we should take with the rook. But that's the reason why chess is so complicated. You should face those key principles against the reality. You need to check tactically whether those strategical things are actually working. And it turns out rook takes f5 is not so great, because my opponent can immediately play knight to d4, forking those pieces there. And even though it doesn't seem like that dangerous, actually knight c6 is a huge threat, followed up by bishop takes d5, and this is about equal and quite annoying for black to handle. Instead, if I play knight takes f5, I actually solve all of my problems, and this position is much better for black. My opponent plays e7 here, continuing to sacrifice all that he has just to get to my king to start creating some threats. I'm playing knight takes e7, he's taken on f8, queen takes, and now he plays queen to e5. towards the endgame or in the late middle game, it's very beneficial for you to bring your queen into the center. Why? Because in the center it controls so many squares, creates so much pressure on your opponent, so many threats. In the opening, you don't want to do that, because even though the queen is active, it can easily be attacked. So please don't do that in the opening, do that in the late middle game and in the endgame. But the pawn on d5 is in trouble now, and yeah, it's very weak. The knight is coming to d4, and I decided it's very unpleasant for me. I have to somehow get rid of this situation. So I decided, okay, d5 is a weak pawn anyway, so let me play knight to f5, attack the rook, and let him take here. That's what he did. Bishop takes, queen takes d5. It's a check, so I have to do something about it. I played queen to f7, and of course I'm happy to exchange the queens, because I'm just a pawn up in the endgame. My pieces are more active. I would probably easily win the game. But instead my opponent wanted to play queen to d8, and after king to g7, play rook to d3. And I have seen that, like threatening those rook to d7 ideas, and that might be very dangerous if you don't find the right move. But what are the principles telling us? Well, we need to use as many pieces as possible. It applies both to the attack and to the defense. So right now I have two pieces that are protecting my king, the queen and the knight. But I also have the rook, which is not doing anything in terms of the defense, and frankly in terms of the attack as well. Like, it's standing great, it controls the open file, but at this point it's just not enough. Rook d7 is a huge threat, of course, just winning the game. So I'm using this rook. I'm playing rook to e4, and I'm ready to meet rook to d7 with rook to e7, or better to say, even with knight to e7. The rook helps because it protects the knight, there are no threats, and meanwhile my queen is ready to go there. But the rook is also very active, so it's a multi-purpose move. And this is something I advise you always use in your games. Try to make those multi-purpose moves. So here, instead of rook e4, I could have also played rook to c7 back, and that would also stop the move rook to d7. But it's only the defensive move. It only goes back and deals with a threat. Rook e4 also deals with a threat, but at the same time creates a threat of its own, attacking the knight. And it's always better than just making the defensive move. So if you have a choice, choose multi-purpose moves. My opponent somehow was stuck here, because it turns out white doesn't really have any good ideas. He played rook d2 back just to defend, trying to stabilize for now, still having some threats. And here I have a very cute move, which I saw, but somehow I didn't play it. I'm not sure what's the reason behind that. Just improving my king's position, making sure it's safe on h6. There is absolutely no way for my opponent to create any threats for it. And then I'm ready to attack, bring my knight to e3, threaten queen f1, whatever. I have so many active pieces. If my king is in safety, the game is pretty much over. But somehow I haven't found it, or I have underestimated it. I played the move knight to e7 back, which actually loses quite a huge part of the advantage here. But thank God, still black is better. My opponent played queen to d3, and now we exchanged the queens in some moves, because of course we are both nervous here, this craziness is going on, we once again don't have that time, we both have 9 minutes here, and it's easy to imagine some blunders, especially with kings being open. So after knight to g3, I gave a check, rook to e1, king goes to g2, I'm playing queen to e5, like, if you have, once again, your queen in the center, you're controlling so much, this diagonal is covered, nothing bad can happen to your king, but my opponent has this queen d4 opportunity, which I wasn't that afraid of, because I thought my chances in the endgame are very good. Takes, and just rook e3, I'm attacking this pawn on a3, which is, yeah, very important pawn, because once I get rid of it, I can just push my pawn. My opponent played rook to e4, and now I'm not just taking it, because that would improve my opponent's position. Instead, I play 95, which is improving my position. So now if you take on e3, I'm going to just take with the knight, with a check, the king goes somewhere, then I'm going to play knight c4 or knight c2, attack that pawn, take it, and once again that pawn decides the destiny of the game. So that is a bad sequence of moves for my opponent, but frankly it's very good. It's very difficult to give a good advice. He played rook to d4, but now I'm just playing knight to b6, even covering the check. He plays rook to g6, attacking my knight. I play knight to c4, gives me a check. I don't really care about those pawns. This is very important for you to remember. Don't just be too attached to material things. because I can play king h6 and try to defend everything, but it's not necessary. Maybe my king is going to be in trouble. Like you can imagine him playing h6, I'm taking on h3. Let me show it to you. Then he plays knight e4, and I can promote my pawn, but meanwhile, he's gonna play knight to g5 and play rook h7, checkmate. I understand there are some ways to deal with that for me. It's not a straightforward checkmate, but you don't need to allow your opponent to create those chances in the first place. This is the way to lose your advantage. So instead, I don't care about that pawn. You can take it. The most important thing is I'm taking that guy on a3. And basically, there is no way to stop the pawn now. He plays rook to b7, but I just go back to c4. He takes it on b5. I play a3, and he resigns here. There is no way to stop the pawn. Rook b6 checks is impossible. If you play rook to b8, I play a2, rook a8, and rook a3, blocking the a file, and a1 is coming with the promotion. That was a long video, but I hope you enjoy this strategical masterpiece because it's gonna help you improve your decision-making process in your own games. Now, in this video, I share with you the biggest challenge you have at chess right now that stops you from playing so much stronger. And of course, I share with you the recipe, how to deal with it, solve it, and then play much better.